Hi Judy, how are you today?
I'm well, Leanne.
Thanks very much for coming along and agreeing to chat to me about your ideas regarding the referendum and voice to Parliament.
My pleasure.
And I understand you've got some ideas that will take about 10 minutes to go through. So I'd just like to know a little bit more about what information you had a look at and the conclusions that you drew to decide that you were passionate about voting yes in the upcoming referendum.
Well, I'm voting yes because our First Nations people have asked for this. Over 80% is a pretty sizable majority, isn't it?
Yes, you're definitely right there.
I'm voting yes because our First Nations people have carefully planned for this for many years. The planning began before the Uluru Statement, and the Uluru Statement resulted in a 2021 final, very large report on the process which was presented to the coalition government by its Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Ken White. He's a very strong advocate for the referendum proposal.
So you've told us that our First Nations people finally want to have a say in how to go about closing the gaps. Do you think this is a radical change, this proposal?
Not at all. The proposal is neither radical nor a big change. Did you know that all the other developed countries in the world with First Nations people have done more than this referendum proposes? Yes. The USA, Canada, Finland, Sweden, Norway and New Zealand have all done more. In the USA, the government entered into over 500 treaties with American Indian nations way back in the 18th and 19th century.
Okay, well thanks for that, Judy. I've got a few questions that I'd like you to clarify for me. I'll just do that. That's great, Judy. So now, if you wouldn't mind answering some questions to just help clarify your ideas. Do you think this proposed referendum is a radical big change?
Not at all. It's neither radical nor a big change. Did you know that all the other developed countries in the world with First Nations people have done more than what this referendum proposes? Yes, the USA, Canada, Finland, Sweden, Norway and New Zealand have all done more. In the USA, the government entered into over 500 treaties with American Indian nations way back in the 18th and 19th centuries. In Canada, the British Crown entered into treaties with Indigenous groups in their colonies of North America in the very early 18th century, before Canada even existed. And since 1975, Canada has signed 27 modern treaties with their Indigenous groups, most of which contain provisions or agreements for self-government. Imagine the outrage if that was included in our current referendum. Now to the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden and Norway. In Finland, the right of Sami people to maintain and develop their own language and culture is recognised in the constitution, and it has a legislated Sami parliament. Imagine the outrage if something like that was included in our current referendum proposal. In Sweden, it's similar. The Sami are recognised in the constitution, and it has a legislated Sami parliament. In Norway, it's similar. The Sami are recognised in the constitution, and it has a legislated Sami parliament. Now finally to New Zealand. Recognition of Māori began with the Treaty of Waitangi, and there's more. There are dedicated seats for Māoris in the parliament. Currently, 8 seats. These examples are why I'm firmly of the opinion that the constitutional proposal is not radical at all, nor is it a big change.
Oh, that's very interesting. I don't think I knew any of that, so I'm certainly enlightened. And do you think that this referendum proposal is something that we should be fearful of?
Not at all. The overwhelming majority of expert legal opinion is that the proposed amendment is constitutionally and legally sound. I'll repeat that. The overwhelming majority of legal expert opinion is that the proposed amendment is constitutionally and legally sound. A former High Court Chief Justice, a former High Court Justice, Australia's leading public law barrister, the Solicitor General of our Commonwealth, and the Law Council of Australia made submissions to this effect to the Joint Parliamentary Committee that looked at the amendment. As well, the Solicitor General of the Commonwealth, the government's most senior independent lawyer, has provided a full advice that indicates that the proposed amendment would enhance Australia's system of government, and in particular, the operation of representative and responsible government. I'll repeat that. The proposed amendment would enhance representative and responsible government. Isn't that what we want? In his advice, the Solicitor General went on to explain that it would not fetter or impede the exercise of powers of the Parliament or the Executive. That is, it will not tie up the Executive or the Parliament. Isn't that what we want? Finally, it has been repeatedly explained by experts that the proposed amendment has no veto power over either the Parliament or the Government. For these reasons, I'm firmly of the opinion that the proposed amendment is not something we should fear. It will tie up neither the Executive, the Parliament, nor the courts. It will actually enhance representative and responsible government.
Well, that's very, very interesting, those points that you've made. One other matter that I've heard the media and social media is that people are feeling like there's just not enough detail about the proposed amendments to the Constitution. Do you have any thoughts about that, Judy?
There is enough detail. Let's begin by looking at some parts of the current Constitution. I'll use just two examples. Example 1. Let's look at section 71, which refers to judicial powers and courts. It states there will be a High Court, but leaves it to the Parliament to determine how many other federal courts there will be. Over the years, we've had different numbers of federal courts. For a while, we had a family court and a federal circuit court. Section 71 also states there will be a minimum of 2 High Court judges, but leaves it to the Parliament to determine how many. We started with 3 and we now have 7. The Constitution allowed the Parliament to decide these details. My second example, let's look at section 121. It refers to the establishment of new states. This section allows the Parliament to admit new states and impose terms and conditions, including the extent of representation in either House of Parliament, as it sees fit. This was sufficient detail. Just imagine the outrage if today's naysayers were asked to vote on such an amendment. Now let's compare these two examples with the details in the proposed amendment. I'll read out the wording that the referendum proposes for the Constitution. It has a stem and 3 parts. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. This is the detail. This is why I say there is enough detail, but I'd also like to point out that Ken Wyatt, the Minister for Indigenous Affairs in the Morrison government, has emphasised that representation needs to begin at executive level, as it's too late to try to exert change at the party room or parliament levels.
I've got one more question for you, Judy. Quite a few people have been saying that this proposal is somehow racist and is going to divide Australia. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's not at all racist and it's not divisive. I'll begin by referring to the UN's International Labour Organisation Convention 169 from 1989. It simply refers to the rights of Indigenous people. It affirms their right to continued existence within their national societies, to establish their own institutions and to determine the path for their own development. I'll repeat that last part. And to determine the path of their own development. That is the pathway that the Nordic countries and New Zealand are on. It's an affirmative pathway. This is why I say the proposed referendum is not racist and not divisive. By the way, there are already 2 sections in the Constitution that can be used to make laws specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. These are Section 25, with conditions, races may be disqualified from voting, and Section 51(26), the Australian Parliament can make laws for any race. This is why I say the proposal is not racist and not divisive.
Very interesting. I've learnt so much from you today, Judy. I really appreciate your time. So just to reiterate some of that, would you like to conclude what you've discussed today?
Well, the fact-checking examples that I've just referred to are reasons why I'm firmly of the opinion this referendum is neither radical nor a big change. This referendum does not have something that we should fear. This referendum does have enough detail. This referendum is not racist and not divisive. Let this referendum be part of New Australia listening to this very informed, considered and moderate request from Old Australia. Let's come together to help close those gaps. Let us all partake positively in this journey. But if you're not sure about something, please find out. Don't just give up and succumb to fear-mongering. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure.